Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon from wherever this finds you in the world. I hope you're safe, healthy, and looking forward to the holidays and new year ahead. My name is Larry Joya. Like you, I'm a member of the community, using and figuring this technology out on a daily basis. And like many of you, I love to experiment and find new ways to bring the technology to bear, but also show up differently in the virtual world. So what I wanted to share with you today was at the request of many people here in the community for how am I doing some of the things that I've been doing, especially when it comes to adding this idea of a lower third. A lower third, or a chyron, as is the experts call it, is nothing more than a virtual banner, a digital banner superimposed on top of our videos. Maybe we add our name, our title, things of that nature to kind of make it a little more professional besides just being here in my office. And so at the request of many of you, and I thought I'd take some time to put this together, let it be known that I'm not a professional video creator as evidenced by what you've seen thus far. I'm going to try to make this in one take. I will probably mess up. There's no doubt about it. I don't really have all the tools and technology to edit videos and make them look super snazzy, so bear with me as we do this together. I do have a fairly sizable screen in front of me, 49-inch awesome 4K ultra wide monitor. So if I'm looking around the screen, I promise I will do my best to stay looking at you and paying attention to you as we do some things together here in my workspace. But with that in mind, let me start by kind of sharing with you kind of where this idea originated. And for those who don't know what a lower thirds is or a chyron, perhaps we'll start there. But before we do that, I do use a green screen. So let's start there. All right, we'll make this a little more professional, so to speak. For all intents and purposes, I only use the green screen to make it a little sharper for my images and how I show up on video. Fully disclosure, I have not dialed in all of my lighting, so bear with me as we make this work together. So what I want to start with, here we go. What I want to start with is this idea. And frankly, this idea of adding a lower third to video is nothing that new. It really got me thinking as I really been spending a lot of time at home watching a whole lot more videos and kind of seeing the professional quality that exists when we see an interview or we watch the news, God forbid. And we see these things kind of scroll across the bottom of the screen and they have the person's title, maybe they're animated, and they kind of bring a little more flair to the video experience. And so about 6 months ago, I began experimenting with how could I do this within as I sit here and record this here in December of 2021, as far as I know, this is not yet a feature. So for the product team, hopefully you're listening. Hopefully you'll get to see some of what some of your users are doing and incorporate something like this natively into the app. So all to say is I started with some static images. And I'll give you some examples here. I started with something like this. This is nothing more than an example of how I was showing up on video, happens to be with a client. And I had this cool background, great, we can do all that stuff. But this little box right here is nothing more than an object to create a bit of a layering effect within my videos. Now you'll see I added my name, I added my title, and I added a logo. This is nothing more than an object that sits on top of a slide. Now, as you know, we can import new rooms, we can add custom rooms inside of a So that's all I did. I created a PNG file. In this case, I was using Google Slides. I took a background image, happens to be this one. I added some objects to the object itself, the slide itself. I exported as a PNG file, and I placed myself just like I'm sitting here inside of That's great. So I showed up there a little differently. Then I started doing some other fun things, stuff like this, where I really got my clients and those on the other end of the phone, other end of the video, engaging with me very differently. And it really got me thinking, what if we could make this chyron that you see above me here and what will be below me here shortly a little more engaging, a little more dynamic, showing up differently, because static is one thing, but making it a little more engaging, a little more fun, really gets people's attention, especially when we sit in a sea of videos all day long. So let's level set with this idea of a lower thirds, a chyron, as it's referred to in the industry. Let's start with where this thing started from. Let's go to Google. I'm just going to put this little chyron thing. It's exactly as it sounds: an electronically generated caption superimposed on television or a movie screen, right? So technical term?
Chyron.
Chyron, great. And then I went to go Googling this idea of chyron or a lower thirds. So in the design world, we call these lower thirds, the lower third of the screen. And here's a bunch of examples I just found on Google. And you would imagine there are hundreds, if not thousands of examples to draw from. I get inspired just by Google image searching. And here's some examples that you see behind me for how you might want to think about organizing or making a lower thirds. Now, as this loads, of course, you would expect there are templates, there are a bunch of tools you can use to import into your image processing or Photoshop du jour. I'm not even going to go there. I'm going to make this even simpler. And that's part of why I want to share this tutorial, is that you don't have to be an expert in video or an expert in design to do a lower thirds. And that's kind of hopefully the takeaway today, is you can do this pretty primitively using some technology and the apps you already have natively on your machine, whether that be a Mac or a PC. Today, I'm going to be talking about using PowerPoint, or you can do the equivalent for my Mac friends in Keynote. Okay, so here's some examples to draw some inspiration from. Today, we're going to start with the basic version of creating a lower thirds in PowerPoint, and then bringing that over into configuring it and getting it rolling, so you will see that working. So with that in mind, and there's been a lot of chatter in the Slack community, and thank you all for the very kind words and feedback and everyone's other ideas and inspiration on this example. I've shared many examples like this in the past. Now, this particular thread got quite a bit of attention and has a lot of interest, and so that's why I'm making this video. So with that in mind, let's start with the idea. There you had it. That's the idea. We're going to create a lower thirds component together. I want to talk about the setup and take you through how a very rudimentary version of setup, and then we'll bring that back here into and we'll execute it together and hopefully give you the building blocks that you need to go create a chyron or lower thirds for yourself. Now, as I make this video, there's probably easier ways to do this. There's no doubt in my mind there are different ways of accomplishing the same task, so bear with me. As we work through this together, this is how I do it. I would love your comments and your feedback to make this more efficient, more effective, but this is what works for me. So before we get started, a couple things. As I said from the beginning, I am using Windows. So some of the screens you may see here may look a little different for those who are on Mac. I recognize that as I'm recording this video, engineers are bringing Windows up to parity with the Mac version. So there's probably some other things you can do more efficiently on the the Mac side. So just bear with me as I am using the Windows version of mmhmm. So let's start by working in and creating some assets in PowerPoint. So let's go over to PowerPoint. This is a standard version of PowerPoint that I have on my desktop. And what I'm going to do here, very simply, is first and foremost is I have a canvas, just as you would do if that's a Canva or you're using a Photoshop. Very simply, I'm going to use PowerPoint to create my canvas, my background, superimpose some objects, in this case some shapes, onto that background, and make them move using the integrated or out-of-the-box animation feature within PowerPoint. So first and foremost, let's set up our PowerPoint by way of design in terms of formatting. I've learned a lot in kind of experimenting over the past now couple months. Make sure the size of your screen is in a 16 by 10 layout. And we'll do that by very simply going to, in PowerPoint, you go to Design, we'll go to Slide Size, we're gonna go to Custom Slide Size, and we're going to select on-screen show 16 by 9 or 16:10. Both of these seem to work. But what I've found is that if you keep it widescreen, it does not export really well when it goes into mmhmm. So we're going to select 16 by 9, 16 by 10 as the basis of our slideshow. Great. So with that in mind, now let's jump over and start creating some assets. And these assets will be what we use to export and then import into mmhmm. And then we'll talk about the actual setup and configuration. So I'm going to jump over to another PowerPoint and we'll go there. All right, so I'm now in another version of PowerPoint, and here I have a blank slide. And so the first thing I'd recommend you do is, what is your background? So yes, I have this out-of-the-box background. You can see that I picked from the existing rooms with it. mmhmm. What I like to do, and you saw from the very beginning of when I started this video, I was actually in my office, and something I love playing around with is having my virtual background be my real office. And so what I did very simply, was I took a picture, a high-res picture, using my Brio 4K webcam of my office. It's a static image of my office. I'm going to use that as my background and then show you how we can dynamically overlay objects onto that to make it a little more fun, so you really don't know if I'm in my office or I'm somewhere else. So I'm going to start by taking that picture, a PNG file, and dropping it here into PowerPoint as the base layer of my background. And I'm very simply going to insert, I'm going to go to pictures, and then I'm going to load that from my laptop. So bear with me as I bring that in, and it's very simply a PNG file. That is my home office photo. So here we go. There's my office. It is nothing more than a PNG file that I can resize and reshape to my liking. What I like to do is I like to drag it corner to corner, thereby giving me the maximum exposure. So this is my office. This is the real office that's actually behind me, behind my green screen. Now you can have a lot of fun with this. So this is the base layer of my background, or in this case, my custom room. I could very easily just export this as a PNG file, save it, and import it into mmhmm. But let's take it one step further. So if I start where I began to talk about what I was doing in the past, was I was very simply creating an object. I was very simply taking a shape. I was drawing a shape on the screen, something like this. If we think about the lower thirds, they usually go from left to right, or they essentially give a bounding box upon which the person sits on top of or sits behind. Now, I recognize at the time of this video, we don't yet have the ability to layer. So what I think about is myself sitting on top of this box. And so as we think about the setup, we want to, I'm gonna go back over here, we essentially want to have this box become the framework of our lower thirds. Now, I'll be very simple in this. I'll just make it very simple. We'll fill it with black. We'll do outline is nothing. And maybe we'll add a gradient here for the sake of just making it a little more flashy, right? Awesome. That's a lower thirds. It's really quite simple. If I want to add some text to this, and you would do just like you do any other object in PowerPoint, we can go and play with the fonts. We can do all kinds of different things. Great. I want to format this to the left. Pretty basic. Lower thirds. There it is. This could be as simple as exporting this as a PNG file, dropping in as a custom room. But let's take it one step further. So now what I want to do is let's make this object and take advantage of what PowerPoint can do natively, which is add some animation. And quite frankly, we think about the most basic animation could be wiping an object across a screen, and it appears when we click a button. Let's do that. So very simply, I have this little lower thirds object. I'm going to change this to black so it's a little easier to see. Okay. I'm going to select this object. I'm going to go to the animation pane or whatever the equivalent is in Keynote. I'm going to say wipe. Oh, see that? It wiped up by default. So way over on the other side of the screen, way over here, is the animation pane. If this is invisible to you in your version of PowerPoint, it's as simple as clicking on animations and then the animation pane on the upper portion of the ribbon. So there it is, on and off. So great. So we have our animation over here. So let me go over here, this side of the screen. And all I want to do now is I don't want this to wipe up. Let's play it again. When this wipes up, that's not really what I want it to do. I want to wipe from left to right. So in this case, I'm going to go in here and edit the properties of this object. I'm going to say Effect Options. And you can't see this on my screen, but I'm essentially going to go from left. And I want to make it very fast. Great. Let's try that again. Oh, see that? There it goes. So let me play it a couple more times. All I did was create one object. I added some text. I added a very simple animation to it, and it wipes left to right. Now, what I've gone ahead and done for the sake of this tutorial and the sake of time is I've made a little more advanced, a couple more layers of objects with this example. And so what you now see is the same slide, same background, right? Here's my background layer. I've just created a couple different elements within my lower thirds. In this case, I've got a background image. I've got an object of a line. I have this semi-transparent text. So added the same thing, and you'll see the right-hand pane. I put these animations in order so they all come not at the same time, but they come in a specific order that I want to be shown when the animation runs. So if we look at this from the beginning, it looks something like this. Pretty cool. That took about 10 minutes to make, thinking about the layering and the sequencing of the objects, but let me play it again. This is nothing more than a very simple PowerPoint slide onto which I've created a background, I've added a couple objects, and I've animated them. Pretty cool. So now I have a PowerPoint slide, for all intents and purposes, that has some animations on it. And the first asset that I'm going to export in this case, very simply, is this file. And more specifically, I've learned over the past couple weeks of how this works and doesn't work within mmhmm, is I export this as an MP4 file. And as we know, as mmhmm users, we can import an MP4, an MOV file as a background, as an object. So let's start by going to File and going to Export. A couple of things that I've learned. You're going to go to Create Video, and you have the option here to do Ultra HD, Full HD, 720p. I like to export as Full HD, giving me a 920 by 1080 resolution, which is perfect for mmhmm. So I'll do a Full HD export. I will just go and create video, and it will do its thing. It will ask if you want to save the file. I just save it as an MP4 file. Perfect. Now, a couple things to think about. As I've learned in doing this with an mmhmm, we need to create a couple more assets. I think of it kind of as the sandwich. So we've got two pieces of bread, and we've got our stuff in the middle. The stuff in the middle in this case is the MP4 file, but I want to put two pieces of bread around it. The first piece of bread is, before I get to this animation, I need to have something that I sit on top of. What's the first piece of bread in this case? Well, the first piece of bread is, what do I sit on top of before I get to the animation? So what I've done is we can create, I'll take this same PowerPoint slide, I'll duplicate it, but I don't want this as animation. I want it to be a static graphic that has nothing more than something for me to sit on. So I'm just going to go through and delete all the animations from my animation slide. But I don't even want my name on there. All I want is something for me to sit on when I show up on video. So as you can see from this slide, this just creates a baseline from which I can sit on top of. Layer one of the sandwich. The second layer of the sandwich, second slide or scene, mmhmm, is to execute the animation, make all the fancy stuff fly in. And the third layer of the sandwich, the other piece of bread, so to speak, will be what happens after, which creates the static image of my lower thirds. So I now have three pieces. I've got this first piece, which will be a PNG file that I export. There's nothing more than a banner that I sit on top of within a custom room within mmhmm. The second object or asset is what we just created together, which is my actual animation exported as an MP4. The final piece of bread is this, which is the static version, non-animated version of my lower thirds. Three assets, one piece of bread, the stuff in the middle, which is our animation, and the last piece of bread, so to speak, using the sandwich analog, is nothing more than a static image of my Chiron. And you'll see how this all comes together here in a moment. So three assets, one static PNG, one animated MP4, and another static PNG file is all we really need to export out of PowerPoint, and we'll bring these assets over into mmhmm. So with that, let me take pause and change my screen. I'll see you in a second. All right, so part two of this tutorial. I have since switched over my screen so we can now work inside of mmhmm to show you how we take those assets we just created within PowerPoint and bring those into mmhmm and configure them for our Chiron animation. So what you can see over my shoulder here is I now have three assets. I have the three that we spoke to, the three pieces of the bread. The first piece of bread is my static office background with nothing more than a banner across the bottom. The second is what goes between the pieces of bread, which is the actual animation itself as an MP4 file. And the third piece of bread is what happens after the animation. What I want everyone to see after the animation is my name static with the logo or whatever I've created. So I've got three assets, and we're going to import those here into mmhmm. and start configuration and actually execute on the PowerPoint assets we just created. So bear with me. I'm going to do a file new, and we'll start from scratch to give you an appreciation for what this looks like from the very beginning. So I'm now in mmhmm. Hopefully you are seeing this all. You're seeing my background. I'm going to get rid of everything, so it's like we're starting from scratch. Here we are. So the first thing I'm going to do, very simply, is I want to bring in those three assets. That's as simple as adding a couple different things. First, I want to add more rooms. I'm going to add those three assets from my hard drive. And I think we all know how to do this. And you'll see those appear here on the right-hand side of the screen. There we go. Oh, look, it's coming together already. Here's the animation, right? That's just an MP4 file. It's looping behind me. Interesting. Here's the static image from the first piece of bread, right? This is static, nothing more than a PNG file. Oh, and here is the last piece of bread, which is what I want to happen after the animation. Now, three assets, very simply. Now let's start putting them together and figuring out how this all kind of plays out as we build our lower thirds together. So a couple things that I found and working with mmhmm. Now I know these are all things that we're working out within Windows, perhaps we're a little further along within the Mac world. MP4s, I've come to learn, you can appreciate, you can add them as a background, you can add them as a room, just as I did over there. But in this example, we're actually going to add it as a media file, and we're going to make it full screen, giving you more control over how it loops and actually the timing thereafter. So the first thing I'm going to do, when I think about that on my slide tray, here we are, this is kind of meta inside of mmhmm, building this on the fly. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want my static image to be this one right here. Great. I'm going to start with that. And how I like to start building these within mmhmm, at least within Windows, is I create a text slide. And this kind of gives me a place so I know which slide I'm on, as you'll see this play out over the course of time. So this is my static office. And you'll see I'm creating a slide here, but I actually don't really use it as a slide. It's only really a placeholder. So here's my static office. I don't really want that text over there. What all I want to do is associate this background image with this slide. So I'll go slides off. Cool. Now I have a slide with no text. I've got this background image. I'm going to position myself where I want it to start when I open up my video. Right about there. Cool. So here we are. Step one, easy as that. Step two is I want my animation to appear when I click the button when I introduce myself on video. So here I am, I show up on video. I'm not saying much, but then it comes my turn to be introduced. I want this thing beneath me to show up and animate like you would see on television. Here's how I do that. So rather than adding the object as a room, look at that, it works. But you see I had to click over there and it will not stop looping. I don't want it to do that. And so what I've found is let's get rid of this as an object, as a room, and let's add it as a piece of media. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to click on Add Images or Video. I'm going to select my MP4 file. So important, I've now added it down below as a media file and not a room. Really, really important, because when you do so, it actually gives you a little more control over the looping mechanism, okay? So I'm going to create this as a separate preset. I want to have a little different set of features here. So I have now preset 1, this room. Preset 2 is this video file. Now, if I click on the pencil here, I don't want this to loop. So we'll click, uncheck loop. But when I click this, watch what happens. Hopefully. Oh, see, here's what I forgot to tell you about, because I learned this the hard way too. I clicked on it, but it's not visible. So we have to make it full over the shoulder. There we go. And it stops looping. So now I'm in a state where the video, the animation, MP4, has played. But now I'm kind of stuck because I'm on this slide in the slide tray, but I want to put content behind me, or I want to add my next slide. So this is where the last piece of bread comes in. I need to add a static image behind me that emulates this status or latest state of the image, or excuse me, of the video. The last piece of bread, as you recall, is my static image of my office with this static image of my lower thirds. So very simply, I'm going to add another text box. And I'm going to call this end animation, or whatever you want to call it, just as a text reminder for me what slide I'm actually on. I will create another preset. I will do slides off. And in this case, I'm going to change the background to this. Here's the pieces of bread. Static office, animation, then I go to my next piece of slide. Here we are. So now that I'm in this state, 3 pieces of content, now you can get right back into what you've always done so well and we know so powerful to be within mmhmm, is to add content. So while we don't really have layers within mmhmm yet, we can kind of fake it till we make it a little bit. So check this out. I'm just going to add a piece of content here. As you would expect, a slide, a PDF, as you would import anything. I'm going to add a little piece of content here for the sake of this demonstration, which happens to be a little JPEG file. And I'll add it as a new piece of content. I'll make sure that this background for this object is the same as the one prior, right? So that it looks something like this when I show up on video. So I can retweak this, tweak this a little bit. Want this to go over my shoulder. We know how this all works. Great, pretty cool. So to make this all come to life for you, I show up on video and I look like this. Hey everybody, it's great to see you. Hope everyone's doing great. I wait my turn until I'm being introduced, and that looks something like this. Hey everybody, my name is Larry Joya. I'm a senior director here at PwC in our product and technology group. It's really great to be with you today. Today, I thought I would share with you a little bit of my background, but more specifically, it'd be really important to me that we connect on LinkedIn. How about that? I gave you a very quick tutorial on how to make a lower thirds chyron. I gave you at least a glimpse of kind of how the behind the scenes work. Hey, there's my LinkedIn profile. I would love to connect with you. I hope this is helpful. Please leave your comments and feedback here in the mmhmm community or wherever you might find this. I would love to hear from you and hear about your tips and tricks for how you're making yourself show up differently on video now and in the future. Thanks everybody. I hope you have a great afternoon and a great evening ahead. Happy holidays and Happy New Year.